I rise to speak in this chamber about a story unfolding right now in Costa Rica. This country of 4 million people is having a national referendum on October 7th, next week, on the Central American Free Trade Agreement, the trade deal this Congress passed by a narrow margin a couple of years ago. CAFTA stipulates that the last signatory country must approve the deal no later than 2 years after the first signatory country implements the agreement. So for the past 2 years, the United States, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic enacted the NAFTA expansion. The Costa Rican people have resisted it. My colleagues have seen news reports this weekend about a massive rally of fair traders, people who want trade but under different rules, of fair traders against CAFTA in Costa Rica. Some 150,000 citizens in a country of 4 million people spoke out, expressing their opposition to the agreement. 150,000 people, and most thought that a conservative estimate. The pro-CAFTA government gave up efforts to pass CAFTA in the legislature after continued protest against it, including a 2-day general strike last October. There's strong opposition to a NAFTA-style agreement. In fact, the issue of whether to approve CAFTA stirred up such political upheaval that the government chose to go to a public referendum instead of to the legislature. Legislators, not too unlike our peers in Congress, didn't want to face voters in their home districts if they voted for the pact. The agreement must be implemented as domestic law, meaning Costa Rica has to enact new laws in order for the trade agreement to take effect. That bothers hundreds of thousands of Costa Ricans because they have in place today strong laws on health, on the environment, on education, on privatization, on generic drugs, on all the kinds of issues that have helped to build the middle class in Costa Rica. Costa Rica is a progressive country. More than a third of their land is protected in national parks. More than 90% of its electricity comes from renewables. Costa Rica's high literacy rates are well known. It has a strong health care system, and its life expectancy is not too different from our own in this country. Costa Rican citizens have also seen what NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, did to Mexico's middle class, and what especially it's done to Mexican farmers, small peasant family farmers. These factors have created strong resistance to entering into an agreement that can handcuff policymakers from setting pro-growth, pro-development policies in their own country. As this chamber knows, NAFTA-CAFTA deals are about a whole lot more than just tariffs and quotas. These agreements are top-down pacts that lock in new rules on investment, on food safety, on services, on procurement. This month, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development issued a report warning developing countries to be wary of bilateral and regional free trade deals as they're currently written, warned them against signing these agreements. The UN report cited NAFTA as an example of a trade agreement that may have short-term benefits but does long-term harm. You hear a lot of talk from the Bush administration that free trade is necessary to address poverty. You hear that the people, as they say, of these mostly poor countries want trade deals like NAFTA. But what we're seeing in Costa Rica right now, it's what we're seeing around the globe when it comes to trade deals that pure and simple give too much power to multinational corporations. What we're seeing is a loud and clear demand for change. We see it in the WTO negotiations, which continue to falter as developing countries resist WTO expansion. We see it in Ohio, in Lorain and Mansfield, in Youngstown and Lima, in Dayton and Chillicothe, where hardworking men and women who have made America the strongest nation in the world are betrayed by Washington's trade policy. Presidents from both parties have entered into trade agreements like NAFTA, promising they'd create millions of new jobs and enrich communities. Instead, too many of these agreements, too often, have cost millions of jobs and devastated communities. 2 years ago, when I served in the House, we created a bipartisan coalition against the Central American Free Trade Agreement. Religious organizations, labor unions, environmentalists, small businesses, All human rights advocates, small manufacturing companies were part of this bipartisan opposition. The opposition that was evident in Washington and, more importantly, in congressional districts around the country caused the Bush administration to make deals and promises, and in the words of one sympathetic lawmaker to the Bush administration, helped us so that we twisted arms until they break into 1,000 pieces. The Bush administration got what it wanted when it pushed CAFTA through. But we won the debate. Today in Costa Rica, we're seeing similar scare tactics taken by the pro-CAFTA administration. A memo was leaked to the Costa Rican press and has caused an uproar for good reason. In this memo, the Costa Rican vice president and a member of Congress outlined a plan to President Arias that uses fear, threats to local officials, and attacks on CAFTA opposition as tactics to win the referendum. The second vice president, one of the memo's authors, had to resign from his government office while officials investigate whether any laws had been broken. The memo states clearly, quote, "The mayor does not win this canton," which is their political jurisdiction. "The mayor that did not win his area will not get a penny from the government in the next 3 years," quote unquote. Pretty simple. The memo says the government then needs to, quote unquote, stimulate fear among Costa Ricans. It even lists the kinds of fear that are effective. Stimulate fear, create fear of the loss of jobs if CAFTA is not approved. Stimulate a fear of violence and civil strife. Stimulate a fear of Chavez and Castro if Costa Rica does not approve CAFTA. Specifically, there has been an information campaign in Costa Rica that if this agreement fails, then the United States will punish Costa Rica by revoking the existing trade benefits that Costa Rica has under the Caribbean Basin Initiative. That is simply patently false. Costa Rica will continue to benefit from CBI because it's the law. It's a permanent program. Its existence depends on the U.S. Congress, not an edict from the Bush administration. These tactics should sound familiar to my colleagues who recall the CAFTA debate. Those tactics made it very clear that what it was at stake in Costa Rica this week, and when this chamber takes up issues of trade and globalization, is that there are very different competing ideologies. There is the NAFTA ideology and there is the fair trade ideology. In truth, the defeat of this referendum may actually, I believe, do more to improve Costa Rican-U.S. relations, because it's clear there is a fair trade movement on the rise here, in this chamber, in the House of Representatives, and surely across the land. Look at elections last year in the presiding officer's state of Rhode Island, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Missouri, in Minnesota, in Virginia, and Montana. Because it's clear there's a fair trade movement on the rise in this country and in Costa Rica. We have reason to hope. If the referendum's defeated, we can create a new trade agreement that benefits workers and communities, small businesses, people, religious folks, people who care about an economy that works for more of us, that helps us to create a solid, strong middle class, not just supporting multinational corporations. We have a choice here. The people of Costa Rica have a choice there this week. We can continue with the fair trade model, or we can reject that NAFTA and CAFTA model and work together on a new trade deal, a fair trade deal.